Spring 1944. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 pilot grins confidently as he leads his squadron toward yet another vulnerable American bomber formation entering Germany. Of course, it'll be escorted by fighters, but they always stick predictably close to the strike package and can be easily outmaneuvered. Suddenly, a P-47 Thunderbolt drops in from 1 o'clock high, pumping a stream of bullets toward them. Another flashes past their right wing at 3 o'clock, guns blazing. The bewildered German pilots barely have time to react when a third American fighter slashes upward. The squadron leader shouts for the formation to tighten. Too late. More P-47s are coming in from 9, and even from above. The sky is closing in. The Germans don't know where to look next. The interceptors have been intercepted. They've never seen these tactics. They've never seen Zemke's Wolfpack. Formation. Created in November 1940 as part of an expansion of U.S. air power in reaction to events in Europe and Asia, the 56th Fighter Group originally consisted of just 3 officers and 150 enlisted men, drawn from the 27th Bomb Group, who formed 3 fighter squadrons, the 61st, 62nd, and 63rd. In June 1942, after moving to Farmingdale, New York, the 56th traded in its P-39 Air Cobras and P-40 Tomahawks for a new aircraft manufactured by nearby Republic Aviation. The P-47 Thunderbolt was unlike any fighter before it. Nicknamed the Jug, it weighed over 7 tons fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of most fighters, and was powered by a massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. In September 1942, a 28-year-old lieutenant colonel named Hubert Zemke took command of the 56th. Born to German immigrant parents in Montana, Zemke had observed RAF operations in England in 1940 and later helped train Soviet pilots to fly American Lend-Lease aircraft. This practical expertise with Allied air forces would prove invaluable. Under Zemke's leadership, the 56th became the first group to fly the new P-47B Thunderbolt. The testing process was dangerous. The group suffered more than 40 crashes and 18 fatalities while mastering a powerful but temperamental aircraft. Nevertheless, the inexperienced airmen were unfazed. Zemke explained, quote, "The pilots were all eager young fellows who thought the Thunderbolt was a terrific fighter simply because they'd flown nothing else." Instead of dwelling on the Thunderbolt's shortcomings, Zemke focused on instilling in the members of the group the discipline and tactical thinking that would soon become their hallmark. He would later reflect, quote, "The first challenge that makes a boy a man, he'd grasp onto that, holds onto that, and with that, he's pulled right forward by training." A rocky start. On January 6, 1943, the 56th sailed for England aboard the Queen Elizabeth, joining the 8th Air Force for the strategic bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. As training continued in Britain, the group was joined by Polish-American pilot Captain Francis Gabi Gabreski, who had been flying Spitfires as part of a Polish RAF squadron, having previously been part of a P-36 squadron at Pearl Harbor. His experience would prove useful in preparing the group for combat. By April 13th, the 56th was ready for its first combat mission, a fighter sweep over the Dutch coast. However, it would prove underwhelming, yielding no contact with the enemy. Further sorties in the following days would turn out to be just as uneventful. When the 56th finally did engage the enemy on April 29th, the results were less than positive. Not only did the group fail to shoot down a single enemy aircraft, but 2 Thunderbolts and their pilots failed to return. On May 4th, the situation would go from bad to worse. That day, along with the 4th Fighter Group, the 56th became the first American unit to escort the 8th Air Force on a bombing raid on a factory in Antwerp. Upon reaching the Dutch coast, Zemke's radio failed. With Zemke forced to return to base in England, command was passed to 61st Fighter Squadron leader, 2nd Lieutenant Laureen McCullum. Over Walcheren Island, they were engaged by enemy Focke-Wulf FW-190s. McCullum turned his Thunderbolt toward the approaching German aircraft. Targeting a fighter's tail, he opened fire and watched as it exploded into flames. Only afterward did he realize the horrifying truth. In his excitement at finally experiencing his first dogfight, he had not shot down a German aircraft, but a British Spitfire. As the commanding officer, Zemke was severely reprimanded for the incident, even though he had not been present. While it did not prevent him from being promoted to full colonel, This embarrassing mistake, along with the group's continuing failure to successfully shoot down an enemy aircraft, saw the 56 treated as something of a joke by other Allied units. First victories. The group was determined to overcome its less than favorable reputation. On June 12th, Zemke led a sweep over Belgium at 20,000 feet, dropping lower than usual to surprise the German Jagdgeschwader 28. Captain Walter Cook spotted a formation of Focke-Wulf 190s and attacked, reporting later, quote, "Suddenly a big ball of fire appeared on his left wing, and then black smoke poured out. He rolled to the left, went over on his back in a gentle roll, and then went into a violent spin." The 56th had finally scored its elusive first confirmed victory. The next morning, over Ypres, Zemke led the 61st Squadron down behind another Focke-Wulf formation. He closed to within 200 yards of one aircraft before letting rip, causing the fuselage to burst into flames and pieces of the right wing to come off. Minutes later, he claimed a second. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a tough Oklahoman who flew a P-47C nicknamed Half Pint, saw his chance to score a hit on another FW-190, taking out enemy aircraft with his first burst. The 56 seemed to have at last shaken off the bad fortune that had followed them in their first weeks of combat. However, Zemke knew that his men still badly lacked flying experience and put them through a training schedule so rigorous that he even received a phone call from headquarters asking him why the 56 fuel consumption was so much higher than that of other groups. But every gallon used was transforming his rookies into a first-rate fighter unit. A close call. On June 26th, the 56 faced a day that would test both the limits of its aircraft and the resilience of its pilots. While escorting bombers returning from a mission against the Villers-Coublay airfield near Paris, they were ambushed by 16 FW-190s from Jagdgeschwader 2. Robert Johnson, flying at the rear of the 61st Squadron's formation, took the full brunt of the attack. His Thunderbolt was hit by 21 20mm cannon shells, rupturing the hydraulic system and shattering his canopy. Cannon fire left shrapnel in his leg, and a machine gun bullet grazed the tip of his nose. His aircraft plummeted in spirals toward the earth. Fighting the damaged controls, Johnson managed to regain some control by kicking the left rudder to level the wings. The flames engulfing his aircraft miraculously extinguished themselves. Partially blinded by hydraulic fluid, Johnson tried to bail out, but found his canopy jammed, refusing to open more than 6 inches. As he limped toward the English Channel, Johnson was intercepted by another FW-190. The German pilot, likely Luftwaffe ace Egon Mayer, circled Johnson's crippled Thunderbolt. Johnson would later recall, quote, "He came down and I broke into him. As he went on by me, firing, I pulled up in sort of a chandelle." 3 times the German attacked, and 3 times Johnson evaded, despite his severely damaged aircraft. Finally, after expending all his ammunition in futile passes at the stubborn American plane, the German fighter pulled alongside. The pilot rocked his wings in a gesture of salute, then turned back toward France. When Johnson landed at an RAF field near Dover, ground crews counted over 200 bullet holes in his aircraft without even circling it completely. One 20mm shell had exploded just behind the headrest, explaining why his canopy had jammed. He would later say, quote, "Many pilots survived the war flying the P-47 who might not have in another aircraft. I know I did." Boom and zoom. While some had doubts about the P-47, its strengths quickly became evident. As Gabby Gabreski noted, quote, "It was more than a match for the Focke-Wulf 190. It was more than a match for the 109. The P-47's 8 50 caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower, and as Johnson observed, quote, "Its roll rate was very good, and absolutely nothing else could stay with it in a dive." But it wasn't without limitations. It climbed poorly at lower altitudes and wasn't as maneuverable as the nimble German fighters in a turning fight. To compensate, Zemke and his pilots developed tactics that played to the Thunderbolt's strengths. They would maintain altitude, using the aircraft's superior high-altitude performance and attack from above in slashing diving passes, a technique that came to be known as boom and zoom. After attacking, they would use their speed to climb back to safety and set up for another pass. Johnson explained, quote, "We made the enemy come to our level and fight our kind of fight." the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched its most ambitious and dangerous mission to date, a massive daylight bombing raid against the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt aircraft plant at Regensburg, deep into Germany. The 56th took off that morning to meet the bombers on the return journey. Their usual patrol zone only allowed them to escort the bombers partway to their targets and back again, limited by the Thunderbolt's fuel capacity. But on this day, the 56th was equipped with external 200-gallon paper ferry tanks hastily converted for combat use. While these upset the P-47's handling characteristics and didn't feed well at high altitudes, they extended the fighter's range enough to reach into Germany. Colonel Zemke led the 56th to their rendezvous point over Eupen, Belgium. Waiting for the return bombers, Captain Walter Bud Mahurin spotted enemy aircraft to the north, radioing excitedly, quote, "We've got him cornered. There's plenty for everyone. Come on up this way." Lieutenant Gerald Jerry Johnson, no relation to Robert, was closing in on becoming the group's first ace, with 4.5 victories already to his credit. When a formation of Bf-110 night fighters unwisely ventured into the daylight, they provided the perfect opportunity. Zemke described the scene as Johnson and another pilot closed in, quote, "The 61st Squadron came screaming down from the front and caught an Me-110 right over the last box of bombers. 2 P-47 shot at this guy at the same time, 16 guns firing, and both of them hit him simultaneously. That Me-110 blew up as I've never seen anything blow up, and fell on fire directly through the bomber formation, without hitting one of them." After sharing that victory, Johnson went on to claim another victory independently, bringing his total to 6.5. Meanwhile, Bud Mahurin spotted a Focke-Wulf preparing to attack the bombers. In his own words, quote, "I sneaked up behind it and started to fire from about 300 yards, closing to 200 yards. It blew up." Minutes later, Mahurin claimed a second. Unknown to him at the time, one of his victims was Oberst Lieutenant Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutz-Galland, commander of 2nd Group, JG-26, and brother of the famous Luftwaffe General of Fighters Adolf Galland. Wutz-Galland was a formidable opponent with 55 victories to his name. His body wouldn't be recovered for 2 months, found in his aircraft, driven 12 feet into the ground by the force of impact. The battle had lasted barely 7 minutes, but in that brief span, the 56th claimed 17 confirmed victories, 1 probable, and 9 damaged enemy aircraft. They lost just 1 of their own. It was an astonishing performance that prevented even greater losses among the already battered bomber formations, which suffered 60 aircraft shot down out of 375 dispatched. While this proved that Allied bombers could not yet penetrate deep into Germany without prohibitive casualties, it also demonstrated that the 56th Fighter Group had evolved into a devastatingly effective combat unit. Within days, Zemke received the Distinguished Flying Cross, and news of the 56th's achievements spread throughout the Allied air forces. The group also earned a new nickname, Zemke's Wolfpack. The aces emerge. In the weeks following the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, the reputation of the 56th Fighter Group continued to grow. The once inexperienced American pilots now had months of combat flying behind them, and they were becoming increasingly dangerous opponents, with several now achieving ace status. Zemke became the next in the group, achieving his 5th victory in September. Major David C. Schilling followed shortly after, despite having gone without claiming a single enemy aircraft in his first 52 missions. The 56th continued its rise in November, passing the 100 victory mark on November 5th, when they shot down a rocket-armed Focke-Wulf squadron preparing to attack bombers over Münster. Rather than allowing the Germans to form up for an assault, Zemke's pilots tore into them from both sides, preventing what could have been a devastating assault on the bomber formation. On November 26th, the 56th set a new single-day record for the 8th Air Force by destroying 23 enemy aircraft, damaging 9 others, and probably destroying 2 more. Bud Mahurin downed 3 Bf-110s, becoming the European theater's first double ace with 10 confirmed victories. Walter Cook also became an ace that day by downing 2 more German fighters. The 61st Squadron became the first in the theater with 100 victories to its credit. Zemke goes stateside. As a result of the 56th's growing reputation, in December 1943, Zemke was sent back to Washington to brief Pentagon officials and Congress on the air war in Europe, to drum up support for the daylight bombing campaign, which was at a critical point due to heavy losses. Zemke feared the assignment would cost him command of his beloved group, and he was determined to return. Upon hearing he was to be assigned to a desk job at Mitchell Field, Zemke took matters into his own hands. Still holding his original orders to return to England after the speaking tour, he caught a transport plane back to Britain without waiting for revised orders. Zemke truthfully stated to his commanding officer, General Bill Kepner, that he was reporting for duty as per his original orders and had received no subsequent written orders. Recognizing Zemke's value as a combat leader, Kepner went directly to 8th Air Force Commander General Jimmy Doolittle to have the Mitchell Field posting canceled. Doolittle, who would later praise Zemke as his greatest fighter group commander, ensured that the Wolfpack's leader could remain with his men. During Zemke's absence, the 56th had continued to perform superbly under the temporary command of David Schilling, notching 80 more victories. By January 1944, the group's reputation was such that they made a point of scoring their 200th victory on January 30th, dedicating it to President Franklin D. Roosevelt on his birthday. That same day, the 4th Fighter Group, their nearest rival, claimed just its 100th victory, leaving no doubt about which group dominated the skies over Europe. New tactics, new technology. By early 1944, the air war over Europe had reached a critical stage. The 8th Air Force's daylight bombing campaign had suffered severe losses, and despite the growing success of fighter groups like the 56th, the Luftwaffe remained a dangerous opponent. A fundamental problem remained: how to provide consistent fighter coverage for bombers on deep penetration missions into Germany. The need for a solution became painfully clear on January 11, 1944, when the bombers launched a major mission against aircraft factories in central Germany. Though the 56th performed admirably, shooting down 17 German fighters, bomber losses were staggering. The Luftwaffe strategy was working. Wait until American fighters reached the limit of their range, then attack the bombers when they were most vulnerable. Zemke had been contemplating this problem since returning from his stateside tour. The standard tactic of close escort, where fighters flew directly alongside the bomber formations, was proving inadequate. While it provided immediate protection, it allowed the Germans to dictate when and where combat occurred, and it restricted the fighters' freedom of movement. Zemke's answer was a radical departure from conventional escort doctrine. Instead of hugging the bombers, his fighters would range far ahead of the formation, spreading out in a wide semicircle to actively search for enemy aircraft before they could organize their attacks. This tactic, which became known as the Zemke Fan, enabled the 56th to cover more territory and engage the Luftwaffe on their own terms. Initially met with skepticism by command, the tactic's effectiveness soon proved undeniable. By intercepting German fighters as they assembled, the 56th prevented many attacks from reaching the bombers at all. Eventually, the 8th Air Force as a whole would adopt a modified version of the Zemke Fan, the ultimate validation of the Wolfpack leader's tactical innovation. The new tactics were also complemented by new technology. When the improved P-47D models arrived in early 1944, equipped with water injection systems and paddle blade propellers, the aircraft's performance improved dramatically. Water injection allowed the engine to produce up to 2,800 horsepower for brief periods, increasing the manifold pressure from 52 to 72 inches of mercury. Gabi Gabreski noted, quote, "It gave us that tremendous edge that we needed against the German Luftwaffe." The aces in competition. By February 1944, the names of the 56 Fighter Group's top pilots had become legendary throughout the 8th Air Force. Their growing tally of victories sparked an unofficial competition that drove the group to even greater heights. Gabi Gabreski, despite his slow start, was now steadily climbing the victory list, employing a methodical and precise close-range combat style. Robert Johnson continued accumulating victories in his recently acquired P-47D, which he nicknamed Lucky. By mid-February, he was approaching 20 victories, while Bud Mahurin and Jerry Johnson were not far behind. In March, the 56th reached a significant milestone, becoming the first fighter group in the 8th Air Force to surpass 300 aerial victories. However, they also suffered losses. While engaging a Dornier Do-217 bomber near Chartres, Bud Mahurin was hit by the rear gunner and forced to bail out over occupied France. He reached 19.5 victories before being shot down. Though he would eventually make it back to England via the French underground, his combat days with the 56th were over. That same month, Jerry Johnson, with 18 victories on the scoreboard, was strafing a truck convoy when he was caught by ground fire and also taken prisoner. The 56th had lost 2 of its top aces in quick succession. In April, with Bud Mahorin and Jerry Johnson out of action, Gabi Gabreski continued his meteoric rise, reaching 21 victories to become the leading American ace in the European theater. Meanwhile, Robert Johnson was nearing the end of his combat tour. With 25 confirmed victories, he was just one shy of the U.S. record set by World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker. On May 8th, Johnson took off on his final mission, an uneventful Berlin escort. On his return flight, however, he spotted a lone Messerschmitt Bf-109. Johnson recalled, quote, "We were real close enough that I could see the pilot look back over his shoulder as I opened fire. He went into a dive, but I kept right on his tail, pouring fire into him. Suddenly, his left wing came off, and the fighters spun in. That made 26. Minutes later, Johnson found himself in another engagement, downing a second enemy fighter, to bring his final tally to 27. He would later reflect, quote, "My last mission couldn't have been more perfect." With these victories, Johnson became the first American pilot in the European theater to surpass Rickenbacker's record. On the morning of June 6, 1944, Johnson was preparing to board a transport plane back to the United States when he received news of the D-Day landings. Despite his pleas to remain for just one more week of combat so that he could take part in the invasion, Johnson's request to stay was rejected. A time of change. By July 1944, Gabreski was once again the top-scoring American ace in Europe, but his combat tour was also coming to an end. On July 20th, with just a short time remaining, he took time off from a bomber escort mission to Frankfurt to strafe Bossenheim airfield, setting a parked Henkel bomber afire. He recalled, quote, "At that time, our policy was to make one pass on an airdrome and get out, because the flak gunners were always ready and waiting if you tried to come back for more. But I figured the flak had been so light that I could get away with another pass." His confidence proved misplaced. Coming in low for his second pass, Gabreski's propeller struck the ground. With no hope of returning to England, he belly landed in a wheat field and was captured. He would remain captive for the rest of the war. The 56th had lost its highest-scoring ace, but his record of 28 victories would stand as the highest in the European theater by an American pilot. Meanwhile, Colonel Zemke continued to lead from the front. Unlike many group commanders who directed operations from the ground, Zemke insisted on flying combat missions himself. By summer 1944, Zemke had accumulated 15.25 confirmed victories of his own. However, on August 12th, the 56th received a bombshell. Zemke was to be transferred to take over command of the 479th Fighter Group, a less experienced unit that flew P-38 Lightnings. The 56th Fighter Group's days as Zemke's Wolfpack were no more. A new era. Command of the 56th passed to David Schilling, under whom the group maintained its exceptional combat record. While many fighter groups struggled when losing their original leaders, the 56th continued to excel because their success wasn't built around a single personality, but emerged from a system and culture that Zemke had established and Schilling maintained. While nearly every other fighter group in the 8th Air Force had converted to the P-51 Mustang by this time, Schilling fought to keep his unit equipped with the increasingly refined P-47. His judgment was validated by the group's continued success, even as the nature of the air war changed. Zemke, meanwhile, led the 479th through its conversion from P-38s to P-51s and helped transform it into an effective fighting unit. In just over 2 months, he claimed 2.5 additional victories, bringing his personal tally to 17.75. But on October 30th, 1944, while flying through severe turbulence, the P-51's wing structure failed. Forced to bail out over enemy territory, Zemke was captured. The Germans were intrigued by this youthful American who spoke their language fluently. Learning of his German heritage, they spent a month attempting to persuade him to switch sides for propaganda purposes. Their efforts were futile. Zemke was sent to Stalag Luft I, where he was soon appointed senior Allied officer in command of 7,000 Allied prisoners. Even in captivity, his leadership qualities shone through, as he used his natural authority to gradually improve living conditions. Back with the 56th, Schilling continued to lead the group through increasingly dangerous missions. On December 23, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, he led an attack against a large enemy formation, personally shooting down 5 aircraft in a single mission, which earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. As 1944 drew to a close, the 56th Fighter Group had destroyed 674 enemy aircraft, far more than any other fighter group in the 8th Air Force. War's End. In January 1945, with Schilling's combat tour complete, command of the group was handed over once more, this time to Lieutenant Colonel Lucien Pete Dade. The 56th remained unique among 8th Air Force fighter groups in its continued use of the P-47 Thunderbolt, now upgrading to the new P-47M model, specially designed for high speed and climb rate to intercept German jets. This faith in the Thunderbolt's capabilities was validated repeatedly as the group continued to add to its victory tally. On April 13, 1945, the second anniversary of their first combat mission, the 56th celebrated with an attack on Egebek Aerodrome. Zooming across the field at 400 to 450 miles per hour, they fired more than 78,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, destroying 91 enemy aircraft on the ground. The 56th flew its final combat mission of the war on April 21st, just over 2 weeks before the German surrender. When the fighting in Europe ended on May 8th, the final tally stood at 992.5 confirmed victories, including 665.5 in the air, the highest of any U.S. fighter group. They had also scored 58 probables and damaged a further 543 enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground, as well as producing 38 aces, more than any other American unit. After the war, the 56th was inactivated, only to be reactivated the following year as part of Strategic Air Command. Many of the 56 pilots continued distinguished careers in the newly formed U.S. Air Force. Gabreski would go on to score 6.5 victories in the Korean War, becoming one of only 7 U.S. pilots to gain ace status in 2 different conflicts. Zemke, released from captivity when Russian forces overran Stalag Luft 1, served in various command positions, including leading the 36th Fighter Group during the Berlin airlift. Meanwhile, Schilling rose to the rank of Brigadier General before his tragic demise in a 1956 private plane crash. The 992 victories of the 56th Fighter Group during World War II tell only part of their story. The 56th's influence has remained in military aviation through its tactics and in the enduring principle that victory belongs not to those with the best equipment, but to those who best understand how to use what they have.